All right, let's dive right in. We're about to tackle one of the biggest, most fascinating mysteries in all of biology. It's a puzzle that really messes with our intuition and gets to the heart of what science is all about. So let's get started.
You know, it's a question that just feels so natural to ask, right? I mean, you look at a hummingbird's wing or the complexity of a human eye, and you can't help but think, wow, that looks designed. It all seems to be for something. This powerful, almost unavoidable feeling of purpose is the exact mystery we're going to unravel today.
And here is the fundamental problem, the real head-scratcher. On one side, you have this apparent design. I mean, just look at the eye. It's this incredible machine with all these parts working together perfectly for one job, seeing. But then on the other side, science tells us there's just a mechanistic process. No grand plan, no designer, just random changes and environmental pressures playing out over millions and millions of years. So how on earth do you get one from the other? How do we make these two pictures fit together?
To figure this out, we have to go back in time a bit. We need to understand where this powerful idea of design even came from. And it all starts with a very, very famous thought experiment.
So this is the classic argument from design, and the philosopher William Paley really nailed it down. He said, look, imagine you're walking in a field and you find a watch. You'd never assume it just, appeared there by chance. The complexity of all its gears and springs proves it had a maker. Well, Paley argued, now look at something like an eye. It's infinitely more complex than any watch, so it must have had a maker too. For centuries, this was pretty much the only game in town. It just made sense.
And then Charles Darwin came along and completely changed everything. He offered this radical new alternative. Now, the brilliant thing is, he didn't say, nope, it doesn't look designed. He totally agreed that it looked designed. He just figured out a way it could happen without an actual designer. And to really get his solution, we first need to break down what we even mean when we say design.
Okay, so this gut feeling we have about design can actually be split into two more scientific ideas. First, you've got organized complexity. This is all the internal stuff. How all the parts of an organism, like your heart, lungs, and cells, all work together in this incredibly coordinated way. Then, second, you have fittedness. This is about how perfectly an organism matches its environment. Think of a polar bear's white fur in the snow. Darwin's big idea, natural selection, was his attempt to explain both of these things.
Now here's where it gets interesting. Even today, biologists use natural selection to explain all this complexity and fittedness, but they don't all agree on just how powerful it is. You've got a few different camps. Some say selection is a really, really powerful force, but not the only one. Others are more hardcore. They say it's the only possible explanation for the kind of design we see. And a third group just uses it as a research strategy, like the best way to start studying a new trait is to ask, what is this for? What's its adaptive purpose? This debate happening right inside biology is a really important piece of our puzzle.
Up to this point, we've kind of been talking about organisms like they're just passive lumps of clay being molded by the environment. But here's the plot twist. What if that's not the whole story? What if organisms are actually out there actively changing their own worlds?
The great geneticist Richard Lewontin showed this shift in thinking perfectly with these equations. The old-school view, the passive view, is basically a one-way street. The environment changes, and that change acts on the organism. Simple. But the active view, the more modern one, is totally different. It's a feedback loop. The organism is in the equation. Organisms are constantly changing their environment, and that, in turn, changes the evolutionary pressures they face. They aren't just being shaped, they are co-directing the show.
So how do they actually do this? Well, it happens in a few key ways. Number one, habitat selection. An animal doesn't just wait around, it chooses where to live. And by choosing its home, it's also choosing its own evolutionary challenges. Number two, relevance determination. An organism's own biology decides what even matters in the environment. A 1-degree temperature shift might be life or death for a tiny microbe, but a whale wouldn't even notice. And then there's the big one. Number three, physical transformation, also known as niche construction. This is the obvious stuff, like beavers building dams and completely changing an entire ecosystem. They are literally building their own world.
And this all leads to this really profound, almost mind-bending idea from the biologist Mary Jane West Eberhard. She said that a lot of the time, an organism's behavior changes first. Maybe it tries a new kind of food or moves into a new area. That new behavior creates brand new evolutionary pressures, and only then, sometimes generations later, do the genes change to catch up. So think about that. Genes can be followers, not just leaders. Agency, or what an animal does, can actually be the thing that drives evolution forward.
Okay, so we've got it. Organisms are active players, but we're still left with this nagging problem.
In a world without a designer, how can a serious scientist use a word like function or purpose? I mean, it sounds so unscientific. Well, the answer, it turns out, is all about language. Philosophers of science have basically given us two ways to talk about function. The first is the systemic view. This is purely mechanical. It just describes what a part does, right now. For example, a systemic function of the heart is that it makes a thumping sound. It's true, but not very helpful. But then there's the etiological view. This one is all about history. It asks, what is this thing for? It defines a part's function as the specific job it did in the past that caused it to be favored by natural selection.
And right there, that is the key that unlocks the whole mystery for us. The etiological view is what gives scientists permission to talk about what a heart is for. We can say its purpose, its function, is to pump blood, not because of some future goal, but because pumping blood is the historical reason, the only reason that hearts were so successful in our ancestors that they stuck around. It takes all the spooky mystery out of purpose.
Okay, so we have all the clues now. We've got Darwin's amazing mechanism, we understand that organisms are active world builders, and we have a solid historical definition of function. So let's put it all together and finally solve this thing.
This is it. This is the big reveal. The old way of thinking was teleology. That's the idea that there's a forward-looking goal, some kind of blueprint or plan, like a watchmaker has. But modern biology has replaced that with teleonomy. Teleonomy is the appearance of purpose that just naturally emerges from a backward-looking historical process, natural selection. There is no blueprint for the future. There's only a fossil record of what happened to work in the past.
So here's the bottom line. That feeling we get, that warm glow of purpose, when we look at a perfectly camouflaged moth, that's not actually a feature of the moth or of nature. It's in our heads. It's a conceptual ghost, a leftover from a time before Darwin when thinking about a designer was the only way to make sense of the world. We're the ones projecting purpose onto a process that is, at its heart, just history.
And that leaves us with one last, massive thought to chew on. We've seen that organisms aren't just passive puppets. They are active agents in their own evolutionary story. So, what does that mean for us? With our technology, our culture, and the unbelievable changes we're making to this planet, are we now the main force shaping our own evolution? Kind of makes you think, doesn't it?